friends, we're taking another little art break, and today we're doing an art break with a folk art style painting. This is a little larger size than I normally do. This is an 8 by 10, and I had to kind of relearn some of the things I already knew. When you're working on a size this big, it's best to tape it down on a board that you can rotate. Because what happens is when you're working on the top, you're going to get your hand down in the paint. So if you can rotate your painting, you're going to be a lot better off. Well, for those of you who'd like to paint along with me, but drawing's not your thing, don't worry. I do have a sketchbook membership. That's where I have all of the line tracers for any of the paintings I do on my channel. So you can simply trace and then paint right along with me. Go ahead and scan that QR code right there. Take you right over. It's very reasonably priced, and I so appreciate all who support my channel that way. Thank you so much. Well, grab your art things and let's start working on this wonderful little fall time painting. It's starting to get a little cooler in the evenings here, so it's definitely starting to feel like fall where I live. So let's get cozy and take an art break together. This painting was going to be a little larger than I normally do, so I definitely wanted to swatch out my colors, what I wanted to use. So I had an idea of what color palette I wanted to be using on this large painting. I first started with the pear. On the inside of the pear, I mixed up a little bit of the color called hooker green, and I mixed some of my amber paint in there, which is kind of a rusty tone. So by adding just a little bit of rust to my green, I was going to soften it, dirty it up, and make a little warmer folk art style of paint. I'm going right on my dry paper, so wherever your watercolor paper is wet, your watercolor wants to travel that direction. So as long as I paint around my items that are inside of the pear, the colors will stay exactly where they're put because that part of the paper is dry. And only the area I'm going to be painting in, that will be wet and my color will stay there. So I'm going to negative paint around the whole area on the inside of my pear. Once I have that inside paper all painted, that shade of green, it's all painted in the color that I wanted, I'm going to be adding a shadow color. And I've mixed up a teal color down there. I used a bright emerald green and a little bit of Payne's gray to come up with a teal color. And I'm going to be putting on that color wherever I think I might want shadowing. So I'm going to put it on the outside of my pear area to give it a little bit more contour to make it look like it's going around. And I'm basically putting that shadow line on, but then rinsing my brush out quickly, giving it a little bit of a squeeze, and then tickling those two colors together so it's a gradual blend. Now this is a student grade watercolor paper, so the colors might look a little rough at this stage because they're not going to blend as well as if you put them on 100% cotton, but I can still get a pretty good look. I just have to do another layer or two to get my colors to look more blended. Once I finish that inside of the pear, I'm going to be working on the leaves of the sunflowers. I did make a little bit of a mistake here. I should have worked up higher. I'm really used to working on like a 5 by 7 painting, which is a lot smaller. This is an 8 by 10, and I accidentally got my hand set inside of the wet paint. So the lesson I learned on this painting, since I don't often paint this large, is I want to make sure if I start in the middle and I have objects up high that I need to paint, that paint down below has to be either dry because more than likely I'll set my hand right in it, or I need to start up high. And here you can kind of see me setting my hand right in that area. I'm trying to work around it, but I can't quite. Another way I could have solved that problem too is to have taped my painting down to a smaller board underneath me that I could have easily turned and rotated. And then that way I could have turned my painting upside down and I wouldn't have had to worry about that either. But I'm starting at the top here doing the little bittersweet flowers. I'm going to be dabbing on a bright shade of yellow orange called Indian yellow or cadmium yellow first, and then when that yellow is wet, I'm going to be just tapping in a little bit of Indian yellow just to bring it that bright pop of a little bit of an orange to give it that bittersweet feeling in this vine. And for the leaves, I'm using that teal green that I have mixed on my palette down below, using a little bit of the emerald green and the Payne's gray. That's the color I'm going to put on, and while that leaf is still wet, I'm going to tap just a little bit of that hooker's green color that I had mixed up to do my pear. I'm going to tap that color in my green and just let it do that magical kind of color wash blend on its own. I don't have to do a lot. Now that the inside of my pear has all dried, I'm going to pick up some more of that hooker's green mixed with the amber color, and I'm going to put that all over that, and that's going to help glaze that area together and soften my blending lines. So I'm not going to be putting the stronger teal color on the edges this time. I'm just going to be doing a wash of that hooker's green and amber, that dirtier down green. Once I have that area done, I'm going to switch and work to the sunflowers, and I'm going to start with my sunflowers using yellow ochre. The yellow ochre I use in my color palette set that I'm using in the Paul Rubens colors. It does fade quite a lot, so I know I'm going to have to be doing at least 2 layers, if not 3. But I'm going to do the little sunflowers. I'm going to start with the petals all the way around, let them dry, and then we'll go from there. Now I've mixed this next color to do the trees, and it's just amber. It's called amber. That's the color that's inside of my set, and that's the same color that I was using inside of the green to mix with. It's basically like a burnt sienna reddish color. I'm going to be tapping that onto my trees pretty much everywhere, and it's going to be wet, and while it's wet, then I'm going to be picking up just that red color that I have mixed down below in that pool of color, which is a mixture of, it's called Pasilia, I have no idea. Red ochre. It's a reddish color. It's got a little bit of the amber and a little bit of burnt sienna mixed in there. It's just a rustic kind of red. And that's going to give me that real fall feel for these leaves by having that on there. Now for the pumpkins, I'm going to do the same color combination that I did for the bittersweet. That's what I'm going to use on my pumpkins, because when I do my paintings, I like to have that colors, all the colors that I use kind of throughout my painting. So I want a little bit of that bittersweet color that I used at top in the middle, and I'm going to want a little of it down below too. Now here you can see me putting on another layer onto my sunflowers. You could kind of notice how much that paint really has dried a lot lighter. Watercolor does normally dry lighter. What you see when it's wet won't be the color when it's dry, so often you're going to have to lay multiple layers of perhaps the same colors. It doesn't have to even be more pigment. It can just be another layer of the color that you put on. I'm going to check my bittersweet. I'm going to check all my leaves to see if they need another layer of paint, and they all do. So I'm just going to simply add another layer of the same color combinations I did to those areas as well. Now that the inside of my pear is completely dry, I'm going to work a little bit on that hill that my church is sitting on. I'm going to be using the same colors, the teal and the green, but first I'm going to be layering the teal color everywhere because I want it to have a stronger teal feel and less of a green. So I'm going to lay the teal on everywhere, and then once I have a layer of that on, I'm going to be using that green color that I had used in the pear as another additional color of laying that around the edges and giving a little bit of contour that way. And of course, this little hill will get another layer of the paint as well. The next area I'm going to be painting is that bow. I'm going to be using the color Payne's Gray. I'm going to be laying that color Payne's Gray pretty much everywhere, but I am going to be leaving just a tiny bit of peaks of white of paper on the front of that bow just to give it some bright highlights. And then there's going to be additional shadows in the loops of the bow. I'm going to be using that same color for the little roof line of the church, and then I'm going to be making one of those hills down below the same color of Payne's Gray. That way it makes it feel very balanced for my eyes and helps me move around the painting because I have some of that color at the top, in the middle, and down below. Now that that hill in the front of the pear has had plenty of time to dry, I can see I need to add another layer of the color. So I'm just going to be mostly layering just the teal color this time. I have that green undertone built in, so I want it to have more of a teal feel when it dries. So I'm going to just put the teal on the top and let that layer dry. Now let's go ahead and add a little light to the church windows and the bell tower. I'm mixing up the same yellow that I used on the sunflowers, watering it down considerably, and just putting in just a tish bit of that golden color on the inside just to give that church a little bit of glow. Now to add the color to the door, I'm going to keep on using the same colors that I'm using throughout my painting. So I'm going to start with that reddish color first, and I'm going to lay that on. And while it's still wet, I'm going to pick up just a little bit of that rust color as well and tap that on the door too to give it a 2-color blend. Now my bow has had plenty of time to dry. I'm going to add that next layer of the shadow color inside of the loops, add just a little bit on the outside of the ribbons down below, just to give this bow a little bit more contouring. I can also add an additional layer to the roof and take a look at where my colors are, how they've dried. I'm going to add just a little bit more golden touch inside of the windows first. I'm going to be adding some shadows to this church, so I want to add that glow to the windows first. I'm going to check my pumpkins, add a little bit more color to them too. I'm still using the same colors. I'm just adding another layer. Now I've tried really hard to leave those little sheep mostly white, and now I'm going to mix a really light shade of burnt umber, just kind of a real light, mostly water, just a tiny bit of color, almost lighter than tea. And I'm going to brush just a little bit of color in there so they're not just the plain white paper. I'm going to be adding that color on. You can see me testing it there to see what color I'm on. And I'm going to be using some of those same colors to do that church color as well. I still want it to have kind of a whitish feel, but I don't want it to be the bright white of the paper. And I want those two areas on the side to look like they're farther back, so it's going to have a darker shadow there, and that front piece is going to end up lighter. And that, by having it lighter, will make it look like that front part of that church is standing out. I'm using round brushes to do this painting, and I like using the Velvet Touch Princeton line of brush. It's a synthetic brush, but it's got a nice little point on it. It's got a nice bounce to come back and keep its shape. And I'm using the number 10 mostly on this, which sounds like a really large brush for this little painting, but it has a really nice little tip on it, and it works great for doing these small little areas. I use it to do the trunks and the trees, those little small areas, on the flower petals for the sunflowers, pretty much everywhere. I do have some links inside of the description box for any of the items that I like to use often. If you want to check them out, they're inside of the description box. Now I'm going to work a little bit on the inside of the flowers, and I'm going to start with that rusty color I had mixed up and I used in the door and the trees and some of those other areas. I'm going to be doing that in the biggest area of my sunflower. I'm still leaving that very center piece, which is going to look like a button in the end. I'm going to leave that white because I'm going to be wanting more of a burnt brown color for my little area for the buttons. I'm going to come down and start working on those little sunflowers that are inside of that one hill. I'm going to start with that golden color, paint the sunflowers. For the center of the polka dots in that blue area, I'm just using a little bit of that rust color. I'm going to use kind of the same browns to do the little stem on top of the pear as well. This painting is all starting to come together. I'm working all the pieces and letting them dry and then seeing where I need to add additional layers, and that's basically how watercolor works, is you put on one layer, you let it dry, see how it dries, and then add another layer of your paint. It takes a little patience, but it's well worth it. Take your time, go slow, let your colors dry naturally if you can. That way the color and the pigmentations will dry down into your paper, and it's just going to give it a little different look. Now, I know sometimes you have to use the hairdryer because you need to get the painting done, but if you can and you have the time, let your paint soak into your paper. You'll get a slightly different look. I'm going to continue on adding all the little tiny details. I'm going to be putting the button color on next, and that's that burnt brown color or a burnt umber color. It's going to need another layer because it's going to dry fairly light, as so many of the other colors do. For the sunflowers that were in that pattern down on the hill, I'm going to use that rusty brown color and then paint the centers of those. And I'm going to use that same rusty color to paint the around the sunflower. So I'm going to negative paint around that hill and fill that layer in. I really wasn't for certain yet what color or whatever I was going to do on that last hill on the side, and I really didn't decide until I got that sunflower area done what colors I was actually going to use. For the path, I basically used the same colors that I had used on the church, except for I'm going to make a little bit darker, a little bit more pigment in those layers, not as light as what I put on the church. I'm just going to continue on that. I'm also going to be adding some pen work and some color pencil at the end. So this is just the watercolor step, and I'm going to be adding a little bit more detail at the end by adding line work and texture that way. Now this is where I finally made up my mind what I wanted to do on that last hill. I first started with that rusty brown color. I was going to be doing a swirl pattern inside of there, and I thought I would do that with color pencil, but I layered this color on first, and then for the shadow color on my hill, I picked up a little bit of that more reddish color in my palette, and I used that on the outside of the hill to create those shadow marks, and then just slightly blending those colors together. I thought it looked good with the rest of the painting. It was the same colors, but it was slightly different because it had the red. And I chose to put the rust on first so that it wouldn't look so red in the end. The color swatch I had been showing you were the colors that I had worked up for the idea of what color I wanted to create the background. I knew I wanted to keep it light in a parchment feel, so I mixed up a little bit of yellow, a little bit of brown, and came up with my first golden color, and I did that all the way around my painting. And then now I'm coming back in with a slightly darker, more brown color. I started at the one hand on the right hand side and then moved my way around the painting up and around so I didn't have any strong dark lines. I did my background, let it dry, and then now I'm going to be starting on the pen work. I'm using a micron pen in the nib size 01. I wanted a nice small nib. I wanted to create those black little faces on my sheep and the little feet in dark black as well. I'm going to be using it to outline the windows and give them a little bit more detail. And I'm going to be doing some extra little scribbly bits throughout. This is just going to add to the extra detail of this painting. And I need to make sure if I'm going to have that black up so high and the vine work up high, I need to have it down below as well. So I'm going to work some of that detail in the bottom as well. Now a micron pen will be permanent once it dries, so you can go back in and add more watercolor if you need to after your pen is dry. And I do on this particular painting. I do come back in and add more lines and more details of watercolor after I have my line work done. Normally I'm okay with squiggly wiggly lines, but I wanted the stems on the flowers to have more of a straight feel. So I used just a tiny bit of my watercolor paper and drew a straight line, which is really unusual for me to have a straight line and not be really scribbly, but that's what I did for the stems of my flower. Now I'm going to be taking that tape off so I can actually turn my painting. I'm going to be using that pen to create the vine work as well, and I need to pull that line towards me. That's how I'm going to be able to make more of a flowing line, is to be able to pull my pen work towards me and not away from me. So I needed to be able to spin my paper. So I needed to get that paper untaped so I could turn my paper around the way that I needed to. I've pretty much finished with the black line work. Now I'm going to move on to the color pencil, and I love using color pencil to add more texture and even a little bit more vibrant colors, a different color look to my paintings. So I chose some colors that I had used in my painting, but also a few colors that I hadn't used, and I add those additional on. I knew I was going to be making that hill in front of the church a little bit more detailed with little tick marks going and following the curve of what that hill might be. And I'm using a variety of colors in there. I start a little light, but I'm going to be working a turquoise colored pencil in there too to give it even more detail. Here you can see me putting the swirl patterns in using a couple different colors of the color pencils. It worked great to add the texture this way. I can use the color pencils to darken my shadows, add more line work, whatever I want to really bring out in my painting. I'm going to be adding a little bit of white using a white China marker. It's a Sharpie marker. It acts like a real soft color crayon. You want to use it towards the end of your painting. It doesn't want to accept material so well over the top, but I'm going to use that to my advantage. I'm going to put a layer of that on part of my pear and then add an additional watercolor on the top, and it's going to repel my color and create a very interesting look. Well, we're almost done with this painting, so let's go ahead and take a look at what it looks like sitting in my studio amongst some of the other paintings we've created so far on my channel. Last week's tutorial was this cute little character, Miss Millie Buttercrumb. She loves to bake pies, and her favorite saying is, "A little bit of butter never hurt anyone." And I think I agree with Miss Millie. If you enjoy creating in this whimsical style or even a little bit of folk art, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a comment or give me a thumbs up. It really does help YouTube push my channels out there. For those of you who'd like to create with a painting like this, I do have digital downloads inside of my Ko-fi shop for a print, cut, and create option. You can simply use the digital download, create what you like, create for yourself, or even sell it. There is a small use license on there, small business use license, so you can go ahead and create whatever you would like. Well, thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll create right along with me.